So the central defining character trait of Abraham, which he passes on to his descendants, is drive. And it makes sense. To create a nation that's going to stand up to the entire world, to be willing to die for your beliefs, requires tremendous drive. And that's exactly what the Jewish people have done in history. But we also understand from a psychological perspective that whatever traits, and this holds true for every individual, we're all different, we have strengths and we have weaknesses. And whatever positive trait we have also comes with a negative. But without the negative, we wouldn't have the positive. A person with a lot of energy is probably very impatient. But if they were more laid back, they wouldn't have the same energy. So the Jewish people's great strength is really this drive, but the negative is very fascinating also, and it's just as important to understand the negative as it is to understand the positive. The greatest negative trait the Jewish people have, and it's mentioned in the Bible over and over again, is that we're stiff-necked people. And it makes total sense, because to stand up for your beliefs, to be willing to die for your beliefs, to not care what the world thinks, boy, do you have to be stubborn. But it's an entire nation of stiff-necked people, which means on a practical level, and we see this in our past, and you see it today, you can see it in the Jewish state, it's the hardest job in the world is to unify the Jewish people and to lead the Jewish people. We're all familiar with that famous interaction between Golda Meir and Harry Truman, where Harry Truman, President of the United States, says to Golda Meir, you have no idea what it's like to be the president of a country of 180 million people. And Golda Meir says, and you have no idea what it's like to be the prime minister of a country of 1.8 million prime ministers. That's the Jews. We know the joke about, two Jews stranded on a desert island build 3 synagogues. One for each and a third that neither will go into. But if we look at reality, it's not humorous, but it is humorous, but it's reality. So we always say that real life is actually stranger than fiction, and a true story illustrates this point beautifully. A couple of years ago, first night of Hanukkah, the CNN reporter went into the only functioning synagogue in Kabul, Afghanistan, and he found the last 2 Jews in the city, Simon Tov and Levi. And he goes to Levi, and he says, the last 2 Jews in the entire country, and you're not even lighting a menorah together. You're on one side of the shul, he's on the other. What's going on? And he says, I've lived through everything in this country. I've lived through the Soviet invasion and the Taliban and the U.S. invasion. But that guy, Simon Tov, he's evil. And I remember reading it, and I was laughing and crying at the same time. But that's the Jewish people. That's our great strength and our great weakness. And the lesson we learn from that is, of course, that the hardest job in the world is to lead the Jewish people. It takes a very unique combination of strength but diplomacy, because you can't push Jews around. When I was studying to be a tour guide in Israel, I had a course from Meir Pa'il, who's Israel's preeminent military historian, and he said something very interesting, and again, beautifully illustrates the point. He said, I've taught in every war college in the world. I've seen every army that an Israeli can see on maneuvers. He said, every army is the same. In every army, the officers give orders. He said, but in the Israeli army, in the Jewish army, he said, you got to explain things. And it was such a funny statement, because that is the Jewish people. Every Jew thinks he's a general. And again, we see, on one hand, it's a fantastic thing, because it means that Jews, such individual people, they think on their feet. They know how to take responsibility. They get the job done. But on the other hand, it makes for a very divisive, fractious people. We see it in Israel. So many political parties, so much infighting, the energy, the intensity in the country. Anyone who visits and then goes back to where they came from will see it. But to be aware of this great lesson, which appears early in Jewish history and follows us through, is another key to understanding the Jewish people and the Jewish people's potential.